Welcome to Protect, Suicide Prevention Training Podcast for Healthcare Professionals. I'm Manan, Consultant Psychiatrist, Founder, and Head of Faculty at Progress Guide.
Good day, this is Mahi, your host. We're on to episode 19. Over April and May, we have seen a big surge in our listening audience, so thank you to all of you who have helped spread the word.
Thank you indeed. We have set ourselves a life goal of bringing progress to practice of 1 million healthcare workers, equipping healthcare workers with the skills and competencies that they need to support people in suicidal distress is essential to transform frontline mental health care delivery. The number is quite arbitrary and varies from 1 to 10 million based on how strong I'm feeling. It's something that we refer to as our Everest. The point is that no way can we reach new horizons without your support. Along with all the training courses we run, the podcast is perhaps the most influential. It's free, provided in bite-sized chunks, and people can listen to it while they're driving. So thank you for being part of our efforts. Keep sharing the episode links in your WhatsApp groups or Facebook or Twitter or any other social media platforms that you use.
And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. Rate us and review us. It all helps to grow our audience. I think, Manan, with the new comprehensive programs for schools and workplaces, you may have to redefine the population, as it's no longer healthcare workers.
That's true, actually. We now have a fully fledged program for the educational sector, schools and universities. You all might have seen the article in The Guardian about the University of Bristol being sued under the Equality Act by the parents of Natasha Abrahart. It's a really tragic story. Natasha, who was 20, a physics undergraduate, and suffered from severe social anxiety, died a day before she was due to give a terrifying oral exam in front of teachers and fellow students. Between 2016 to 2018, Natasha was one of 11 University of Bristol students to take their life in a 3-year window. Since then, though, the university has done a lot of work to address mental health challenges in the student body.
Was it 2020 when you delivered the Protect training for University of Bristol?
I think it was. Really engaged audience, very keen to learn. You could see their desire to do their very best for their students. It is really sad what has happened, but maybe this court ruling will draw more attention to the gap that exists in the university and school sector.
I've heard the term called missing middle being used. Not so unwell to need secondary care, but too unwell for primary care or university counselling services.
I think uni and school students could easily fall into that group. Yeah, as you said, missing middle. And one can see how uni students can get very isolated, away from home and family, strong themes of shame or guilt if they are not able to perform, the stigma of mental illness mixed with alcohol and recreational substances, and throw in a bit of impulsivity of youth, and how easy it is to get perilously close to the suicidal ideation-action divide being closed. Maybe more universities and schools will take notice following Natasha's story becoming public, and there will be more support for the missing middle. One of the ways in which we can support the missing middle is through skills enhancement. We got Protect Ed or ED to designate the educational sector. So Protect Ed is for school and university counselling services. And in Bristol, we covered a lot of content which even experienced mental health professionals will not have in their arsenal, in their knowledge base or skill set. Through the right training, you can genuinely help counselors build their assessment and safety planning skills. We also have Life, which is for teachers and lecturers and professors, so they can spot things early and engage students in conversations that are supportive, and Pearls for students themselves to support their resilience and well-being. Together, the comprehensive program is called Protect Life Pearls. It has a nice ring to it. Certainly, our schools and universities serve as the oysters where tomorrow's pearls, our future, gets polished and fashioned. So it is quite fitting. So in the polishing, there is a fair bit of friction which can create emotional pain. But this can be addressed through appropriate training, and we owe it to these learning institutions to create an environment of positive mental health so that students can thrive and flourish. So you're right, maybe our Everest should be 10 million rather than 1 million healthcare workers.
Whatever the number may be, we can't get there without your support. So please keep doing what you are doing, because it's working.
I know, we've completely digressed and gone off at a tangent. Anyway, thank you to all our listeners for the support.
So, for the last few episodes, we have been systematically working our way through the AWARE framework. A for anxiety, W for waiting, A for agenda, R for resources, and E for experience. We learned about the rational and rationalizing mental spaces from the AWARE qualitative study. Putting it simply, we see what we want to see. If a practitioner makes up their mind about what the best outcome is for the patient very early in the assessment process, then that skews the assessment in terms of the information that is collected. Certain bits of the information get more weighting than others, which then ultimately impact the clinical decisions that are made. Being aware of the mental space in which one is operating is crucial for mindful practice and decision making. In the last episode, we had an in-depth discussion about experience and how past events, particularly the loss of a patient or a loved one to suicide, can impact how we approach a clinical scenario. The challenges of sticking to the facts of the individual presentation in front of the assessor multiplies many folds because of the emotional undertones of past adverse events. It is not difficult to see how one can get into a rationalizing space if there are strong feelings or opinions about a particular patient or patient type based on diagnosis or demographics. Remember, you can find the show notes, figures, and images at www.progress.guide or in the Protect Guidebook available at Amazon. Today, we are going to build on the discussion on experience and introduce you to a phenomenon called creep, crash, crawl. Manan, what is creep, crash, crawl?
We're going to gradually reveal what this is, so please humor me and play along. Let's imagine you're putting on 50 grams in weight every single day. When you look in the mirror, what do you think you will see?
That I am putting on weight?
Will you though? Chances are you will see exactly what you saw yesterday and the day before and the day before that. 50 grams dissipates all over the body and will be imperceptible to the human eye.
Of course, slow but steady changes are not that easy to spot.
Exactly. But if a friend who hasn't seen you for a year bumps into you, say at the airport, they will see that you have put on over 18 kilograms in weight. 50 grams times 365.
Now, that will be noticeable. I guess a bit like images from a few years back on Instagram timeline or Facebook memories. They often tell a tale of weight that has crept up.
That's correct. If you are not one for perceiving human emotions like your friend being surprised and trying to be polite and not talk about your weight, the social media posts over time will capture the increase. Anyway, to cut a long story short, spotting slow but steady changes, as you said, demands a degree of mindfulness.
Is this about gradual creep in risk thresholds?
Patience, madam, we are getting there. Now, let's imagine a step change. Say someone signs up for an Ironman competition, and on day 1 of training, 18 bricks, each weighing 1 kilogram, is put in a rucksack, and the person's told, you have to get on a treadmill with this and keep that rucksack on.
They will not do that.
You're right. They won't. But why do you think that is?
Because unless you were super fit, that would be too much to carry around.
Yes, I guess you almost need to be Superman or Superwoman to kind of carry around that kind of weight on day 1. I can't speak about others, but I know that my knees will come crashing down and I will think twice before putting on that weight on my shoulders and walking around. However, I'm pretty certain that if the weight of 18 kilograms was added at the rate of 50 grams a day, as I said, 50 grams times 365, which is 18 kilograms, I would be carrying it around with me without a thought. Of course, then I am setting myself up for a different kind of crash as my coronaries will get coated up with cholesterol.
Okay, so a slow, gradual increase, one will not notice, but a sudden step change I will notice.
In fact, a step change like that, whether that be 18 kilograms on my back or a heart attack following years of slowly increasing atherosclerosis, will make us hyper-aware of the change phenomenon.
I think I have a sense of where you are going with this. So, how is this relevant to suicide risk assessment?
We learned in the AWARE framework how our clinical decision making is influenced by experience. Every time we take a risk and there is no adverse clinical outcome, our risk taking creeps up ever so slightly. This shift is almost imperceptible.
So, when things go all right, that is a signal to our amygdala that it was okay to take that risk.
Unfortunately, it was okay not because the risk was acceptable, but because suicide is a rare phenomenon. Now think about someone who is working in an emergency department or an acute care team. They might see 3-4 patients in suicidal distress every single day. And very rarely do people suicide. So every single day, just by a little, your risk-taking threshold is going up. Sometimes there are near misses and our risk-taking fluctuates, but over time, there is a slow but steady increase. Some might say that is just confidence gained through experience. But the truth is, every non-event, in terms of adversity, following an assessment, ever so slightly is pushing up our risk-taking.
So that is the creep. What is the crash?
Well, it is only a matter of time that our risk-taking would have risen to the extent that a crash is imminent. We've spoken about this in the past that there are only 2 groups of professionals in mental health care, those who have had a suicide and those who are going to have one. It is sad but true, as without risk there is no recovery, and the very nature of the work demands that we take risks to help people move forward in their recovery journeys. However, if our risk-taking has been gradually increasing, we are set up for an inevitable fall or a crash.
So, when there is a suicide, that signifies the crash?
Yes, our risk-taking threshold does come crashing down, partly because as practitioners we are conscientious and try very hard to work out where we went wrong and how we did not see that coming, as countless others like that had not done anything like this, and partly because suicides are followed by reviews and investigations which, even in their kindest forms, feed into the guilt and soul-searching most practitioners are already experiencing.
Almost like a threat response.
Yes, you mentioned the amygdala before, right? So, understandably, following a serious untoward incident, the amygdala is activated and practitioners get incredibly risk-averse and our risk-taking threshold goes through the floor.
So, is this the crawl phase?
Exactly. Practitioners become defensive in their practice and worry that they are under scrutiny and Big Brother is watching over their shoulder. This is not a particularly helpful scenario for the people the clinician is supporting either. Like as practice could become fairly prescriptive and restrictive, and it generally stifles growth and recovery in people.
So, what needs to happen?
Well, if one encounters a clinician in the crawl phase following an untoward incident, there has to be support for practitioners to stand on their 2 feet again. It is important that organizations create a learning environment in which lessons are learned without blame, in line with just culture proposed by initiatives like Zero Suicide.
So, when you pull all that together, we have the phenomenon of creep, crash, crawl.
Yes. Risk-taking gradually creeps up, followed by a crash because it has silently crept up way too much, due to suicide being a rare phenomenon. And when the crash happens, there is a period of crawl before practitioners can get back on their 2 feet and act with confidence. In our day-to-day life, there are many examples of creep, crash, crawl. For example, did you know that over the last 300 years, the size of the wine glasses have slowly but steadily increased in size? It's, I guess, part of the jigsaw of how modern society interacts with alcohol. In the 1700s, wine glasses were 70 mils. Now the average wine glass is 450 mils. That is more than 6 times. One can see parallels at the individual level for someone who is struggling with alcohol, as how increasing alcohol consumption gets normalized over time till there is a crisis as the person's mental health crashes.
And it does take them a while to get back on their feet.
And you know what? If you're talking about risk and societal issues, think about the global financial crisis of 2008. That too is a good example where the risk-taking by markets in terms of mortgages had steadily increased over the previous 2 decades. I know I'm digressing and going from suicide risk assessments to mortgages, but back in the day, Mortgages used to be around 70%. When the crash happened, there were mortgages which were at 105% with cash back. So when the market innovates, say some bank creates a mortgage where they are paying 80% of the mortgage loan, and the norm was, say, 70. The whole industry chases that innovation, and before you know, everyone is at 80, right? And then someone pushes the risk up further, goes up to 85 or goes up to 90, till you got to a point where the mortgages were 105% mortgages with cash back, as I said. So it was inevitable that the housing bubble had to crash. New words entered our vocabulary, subprime loans. Before 2008, I'd never heard that word. So following the crash, there was considerable scrutiny. And it took a while for the financial institutions to get back on their feet. And in fact, even a decade on, risk-taking was quite low. We saw that again at the beginning of the pandemic, but things have loosened up again with lending.
In your training course, you talk about a frog being put in a beaker and the Bunsen burner being slowly but steadily turned up.
Yes, that image actually always brings out a laugh. I know it's a serious issue. Perhaps not a laughing matter for the frogs, but it is actually possible to boil a frog alive as it does not react to the temperature creeping up. However, if the same frog was dropped into a beaker of boiling water, it will jump straight out.
We've been talking in metaphors. Let's make it concrete for our listeners.
Of course. You all know from the AWARE qualitative study about the significant impact of the professional experience of suicide on clinical decision-making. Following the loss of a patient, professionals often struggle with positive risk-taking as their confidence is quite low. However, to fully understand how experience fashions clinical practice, one has to examine the preceding step. Carter and Spital cite how clinical experience in low-prevalence disorders encourage confirmation bias. Given suicide is a rare outcome, every time post-assessment a risk is taken without an adverse event, risk-taking creeps up ever so slightly. This shift is almost imperceptible. Assessors learn that clinically it was the right decision. However, nothing happened not because the risk was acceptable, but because completed suicide is fortunately a rarity. So risk-taking gradually creeps up. Sometimes there are near misses and risk-taking fluctuates, but over time there is a slow but steady increase. Some might say that is just confidence gained through experience, but the truth is every non-event in terms of adversity following an assessment ever so slightly pushes up risk-taking. It is only a matter of time that in our clinical practice, risk-taking would have risen to the extent that a suicidal crash is imminent. When such an eventuality does happen, we get to witness the crash down. Number of reasons for the crash down. Number one, mental health practitioners are fairly conscientious, as I said, and try very hard to work out where they went wrong and how they did not see that coming. Number two, given countless others in suicidal distress had not acted, why did this person act and how could I have got it wrong? Number three, suicides are followed by reviews and investigations, which, as I said, even in their kindest form, it feeds into the guilt and soul-searching most practitioners are experiencing anyway. So, understandably, following a serious untoward incident, practitioners get incredibly risk-averse and become defensive in their practice, worrying about being under scrutiny. So risk-taking crawls along. So together we call this phenomenon creep, crash, crawl. Risk-taking gradually creeps up, followed by a crash and then a period of crawl before practitioners can get back on their 2 feet and act with confidence. Now, Protect seeks to address this phenomenon through mindful reflective practice and specific tools that provide grounding for risk thresholds.
What are these specific tools?
Well, we need proactive systems to be able to spot when our risk-taking is creeping up as it leads us towards an inevitable crash, something that we all want to avoid. In the next few chapters of the Assess module, we will talk about a number of different interviewing strategies. Validity techniques, as they are called, suicidal storytelling, that's another way, and a combination of the two called Before Now. When we talk about safety formulation, the despair framework, that would provide means to ground our risk threshold and not only make our practice safer, but actually help us take positive risks and not engage in defensive restrictive practice. All of these things we will cover in the coming weeks.
This brings us to the end of episode 19. You need to stay tuned in to learn about these strategies in our future episodes. They might help stop the risk threshold from creeping up, crashing down, and crawling along. Remember, the show notes and images will be at the blog on www.progress.guide, and you can get the Protect Suicide Prevention Guidebook from Amazon. There are a number of online video courses as well. Pause and think about your risk-taking after an adverse event. What happened? Did you find yourself second-guessing your judgment calls? What helped you get through the difficult stage? As mentioned after episode 18, which was on experience, do spend time reflecting and looking in the rearview mirror. Reflection is an essential element of progress to practice. Share your musings with us. Tweet your thoughts about experience of or lack of and tag #GuideProgress. It helps get the word out about the podcast to more professionals. You can email your thoughts to us at admin@progress.guide with your suggestions and comments, particularly if you have questions and want us to cover certain topics in the discussion. In the next episode, we will discuss some of the interactive exercises that relate to the AWARE framework from the Protect Workbook. You can connect with Manan on LinkedIn or follow our LinkedIn page by searching on LinkedIn for progress.guide. We are also on Twitter and YouTube. Our Twitter handle is @GuideProgress. Helping healthcare professionals become aware of their risk-taking thresholds is an essential step in creating a workforce that is self-aware. Remember, together we can make a difference. Tune in next Friday and we will discuss key conversations with people living with borderline personality disorder and how the AWARE factors shape and influence their interactions. Thank you for joining us today and keep spreading the word.